Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, welcome everyone to the Connecting to Data in Power BI and Relationships for GP webinar. My name is Brandon Cook, and I'm going to be your host for today. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's session is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to the Njevity.com website. We are using GoToWebinar today. If you have any questions or comments during the webinar, open the GoToWebinar control panel by clicking the orange arrow. In the question pane, you can type your question. For this webinar, all questions will be addressed at the end of each demo. Let's see. All right, and it wouldn't be an Njevity webinar if we didn't go ahead and do our mission statement. Our mission here at Njevity is to improve the life and success. Of our partners by providing exceptional business.
Did you get choked up over our mission, Brandon?
Sorry, yeah, my screen went black for a second. I was like, whoops. So partners and customers by providing exceptional business application experiences that simplify, inform, and delight. And with that, we'll go to our first poll question.
All right. Okay, so if everybody will answer that poll question. Yeah, we at Njevity live and breathe our mission statement. It's so important to us that I almost feel like we should stand up and put our hand over our heart when we say that. So as I usually say, this webinar is about informing, and I hope that it will delight each and every one of you and definitely provide you with an exceptional business application experience. So. All right, let's see. So people, we got a great big percent of, looks like half the people are not using it. About a quarter have played with it but are not using it. And then the other quarter are Power BI users. So that's pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that poll out, and we will move on to our agenda. So hi, everybody. I'm Belinda Allen, and I love Power BI. And so I'm a Microsoft Power BI MVP. That's how much I love Power BI. I'm willing to give away all my time basically talking about the wonderful virtues of Power BI. Our agenda today is going to be pretty simple. This is kind of an introductory session, but we're going to talk about something that I get asked a lot. So when I'm showing at conferences Power BI, I frequently get asked at the end, or I'll see on evals, people say, yeah, but how do I get my data in? So we're going to talk specifically about GP and getting data in. And there are 3 different ways we're going to talk about getting data in from GP into Power BI. So depending on whether or not you're one of our users, or you're a partner, or you're somebody who just uses GP that doesn't work with us directly, in any event, we're happy all of you are here. But we're going to talk about those 3 different ways, and particularly like if your data is in the cloud or whether or not it's on-prem. Then we're going to talk about relationships of different queries or different connection points in GP, within GP, and with external data. So we're going to have some demos and examples of those. And then we're going to talk during the process a little bit on basics on data modeling, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So a little bit of housekeeping. The on-prem I'm connecting to is GP 2018. R2, regular, doesn't matter. You could also use 2016 for some of the OData pieces I'm going to talk about. I'm going to cheat a little bit on that, but I'm relying heavily on my friends Sean Dord and Victoria Uden to help us along on that one. They're not on live, but we're going to be taking advantage of some of their blogging work. And then for those of you who are on Power GP Online, we're going to do a demo of using our Power GP Connect, which is another way to get data out if your data is in the cloud. And for anybody who we are hosting data for that is part of Njevity to Go, very soon the Power Connect that we're using, that I'm going to show you for Power GP Online, will also work for those. Sometime, knock on wood, I'm knocking on my head, this quarter, at the end of the quarter. And of course, I'm using Microsoft Excel for one example. I use Office 365, but it's irrelevant which version of Excel you're using. And of course, I'm using Power BI. All right. So we're going to be talking about 3 different locations of GP. So we're going to be talking about Power GP Online, so that is the Njevity own public cloud version that's Azure based. It is full GP, but it's pure Azure based and it's public cloud, and it works like software as a service. We're going to be talking about if you are in the private cloud, if it's hosted. It doesn't have to be Njevity to go for this. You could be hosted with anybody else that does hosting. And so if your data is in their private cloud, how would you get access to that? And then we're going to be talking about GP on-prem. So if you have your GP installed locally in your own network, how do we get data across there? And don't worry, the examples are not that long for the other two versions. While I'm showing one version, if that's not one you're on, that part is going to be relatively short. So don't feel like you're going to be sitting there for 20 minutes twiddling your thumb. We're going to go through that pretty quick. But first thing I want to point out is if you're using data in the cloud other than our Power GP Online or GP on premises, you're going to be required to use something called the on-premises data gateway. And the on-premises data gateway, this is if you want to use Power BI in the cloud. This gateway is what enables your data, wherever it's installed, to connect to data in the cloud. And so it's important to understand that that's something that you're going to have to use. It's not hard to set up. It does need to be set up on a machine that is always on. So you want to make it part of your server farm. If you have your data in the cloud, meaning you either use, if it's not Power GP Online, and you either use like a remote desktop connection or the web client to get to your data, you're still going to need the on-premises data gateway, but it'll be installed where the data is located, and then that's how you'll get access to it. And the on-premises gateway is what enables Power BI to get to your SQL Server wherever your SQL Server happens to lie. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And so our first example we're going to use, I'm going to go through a few slides and then I'll show you a quick demo of this. This is our Power GP Online, and for Njevity to go, or our hosted, the future of our private cloud. And this is a product that we've created internally called Connect to Power GP Online. Now I want to point out this is using APIs that we create and secure for you. If you are so inclined and you have Power GP installed remotely, you could also create your own APIs if you have that skill set and use those APIs as well. For the most part, once you get to the URL, the demo is going to be exactly the same. So on ours, we log in to the company, it's secure. We go to our object list where you can see all of our table views and stored procedures. So the first thing you do, where you see the number 1, you would select the series that you're interested in. Where you see the number 2, you would select whether you want to see stored procedures, tables and views, tables, or just views. Where you see the number 3, this is where you see the object list. So you have an object name, and that's where the first arrow is pointing, and the second arrow is actually pointing to the URL. And then where you see the number 4 on the right side, this is where we grant security. So you tell it which users are associated with that. And then where the number 5 is, if there is a view, table, or stored procedure in your database that we do not automatically create an object for, you can create a new object for yourself. So let's take advantage or look at an example of this. So I'm going to pull in my Power GP Connect, and the first thing you do is you select your company ID. Normally you wouldn't have a list like I do, but I like to play around with mine a lot. I'm going to make it a little bigger here. Then you key in your Power GP Online username and password and click on Log In. And once it logs in, it's logging in now. All right, I get my object list. I can see users and security, but I'm going to go to object list here. And I can come in and go to purchasing, for example. I'm going to pull up all the views that I have. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to grab the URL for this vendor view. And if I were to scroll over to the right, I can go to associated and make sure that Susie has access to it. Great. So now let's go into Power BI. And this is how I would connect to data using an API. Any API at this point, it doesn't even have to be a GP API. So I'm going to come in and click on the Get Data icon right here in Power BI Desktop. On the Get Data area, I'm going to choose that I want to go to Other and choose a web. So for APIs, you would choose Web here. And I'll paste in that URL and go ahead and click on OK. At this point, it remembers my credentials. I've already logged into this one before, but it would prompt me for my credentials, and I would just populate my credentials. Now, what's happening is it's validating my credentials and it's extracting my data, just like any other connection would. Then it's taking me into the query editor. Now, we use a RESTful JSON, and whenever you use a JSON API, it's always going to start out looking like this, which is a little different than what you might have seen in other versions. But Power BI is smart enough to say, hey, this is JSON. So it changes even my menu options here, and I just want to convert this to a table, and I'll click OK. And then I'm going to just click on this double-headed arrow and expand all my columns. So now I have access to all my columns, just like what you're used to seeing. Now, I have something I call Belinda's 3 rules. And the first rule is you rename your query to something that makes sense. So I'm going to call this PGPT, which is 0, which is my company ID. So I know this is my company. The second thing I do is I remove unwanted columns. Now, I can see down at the bottom here, let me scroll down, there are 166 columns. That is way too many. So from the Home tab, I'm going to click on the Choose Column visual there, and now I can select the columns that I want to see. And I only want a few, so I'm going to unselect everything and select vendor ID, vendor name. Oops, don't want that. I also want the current balance. Don't know why that is being a little wicked looking. So we'll click on current balance. I'll stop the zooming so it stops shaking. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now I'm down to my 3 columns. And I always say, err on the side of caution. If you only think you need it, remove it, because it's very simple to go back and add, and I'm going to show you that in just a few moments. The third thing I do in Belinda's rules is I make sure the column types are exactly what I need them to be. And right here, you could see my vendor ID and the name and the balance. It says ABC123, which means it doesn't know what it is. So I'm going to highlight these first 2, which should be text. And up at the top, I'm going to just click on the data type and set it to text. Now, setting the data type in the query editor only determines how this field will work in formulas, how I expect it to work. So like numerical formulas, I could do math on, text ones I cannot. So keep that in mind. It's not about how it displays. On the current balance, this time I'm just going to click on this little visual, and I'm going to choose decimal places. So now I have my vendor ID, my vendor name, and my current balance. So let's go ahead and close and apply. And it's bringing my data from those 3 columns into my my application here. And so now what I can do is just click on, I want current balance, and let's add the vendor name. So now I've got this cool little visual here. And what I'm going to do over here on the right for this one is I'm going to come in, let me make this a little bigger, and I'm going to say, all right, for the vendor name, I only want to see the top 3. There's not a lot of vendors with balances here. And now I need to tell it which field I want. So I'm going to take the current balance and drag it into that field. So I'm going to go in and say, grab the top 3 with the current balance and apply that filter. Then when I come back, I could see the visual of the top 3 vendor balances right there. So you could see connecting to GP data if you have an API is pretty simple and straightforward. All right, so let's talk about connecting to GP on-premises, or even if it happens to be in a private cloud, with OData service. Now, I don't have a live example to show you here, so I'm going to use my dear friend and fellow MVP, Sean Dord. He's got a blog post, and his blog is down at GP Life Hacks. I've done a couple things. I do have the slides. One of the slides here does include links to his blog post, but also in the handouts, One thing in the handouts is the slide deck in PDF form, which you can get all this in. But there's also one called GP Life Hacks, OData Setup. And these are just basically copies of Sean's blog from those 3 posts. But if you're not a subscriber to his blog, GP Life Hacks, I certainly recommend it. It's really a good one. So the first thing I want to point out is you have to set up or install OData. It does not come installed with GP out of the box. And the reason why I haven't set it up is you also have to have a SSL certificate, a secured certificate, to ensure that only the right people get in. And I do not have one set up on my machine. I am not in a, I work remotely, so I am not in a domain. So it's really a little bit more difficult for me to set one up, not being in a domain. So you can see right here that Sean is in the artist domain. So that's the biggest reason why I didn't work through on setting it up. But I want to point that out. This is part of the setup screen itself. Once you're inside GP, you do need to deploy your OData reports, just like you deploy your Excel reports and your reporting services, your SSRS reports. So under the admin, you would go into reporting setup and you would deploy your reports. Once you deploy them, you go in and you can establish which ones you want to see, which ones you want objects for. So you could go through, these are views. You could also do tables, just like our APIs does, and you could set up which ones get assigned to each. Then once you do that, then you can see here we have, you would publish them all. And when you publish them, it puts a path, and you can see the path here on the right side of the screen, right here. So these are paths you could set up. So it's a URL very similar to the URL that I used in my API. Once you do that, then you do need to go through and assign some security for users for that. You would go in and assign a Windows account, and you could use this even if you're not using the web client. You would still need to go through and assign your Windows account so that you could use SQL Server security with your Windows account to have access to it. That's how you're going to grant access. You could do a test connection here. And then at that point, when you're looking at the raw data, then in Power BI, you would go through, and in that same area where I went in other, there is an OData feed option, very similar to the web page option. You would paste your URL in there. You notice that looks just like the web page one. And then you come up with the navigator list where you could go in and look at some of the navigator options if you're connecting. Again, I promised you here is Sean's blog information. So these are the blogs that I did cheat and grab some screenshots from. I do have it available, so go ahead and download or copy from the handouts. In the GoToWebinar pane, you could get access to those. Now, I will do a live demo for connecting to GP data on premises. So even if your data is in the public cloud and you're not using OData, you can connect to data this way. So under the Get Data option, you would choose Database and SQL Server. You do not want to use the Azure. If you go under Azure, there's also a SQL Server. RGP, even if your data is in the Azure cloud, we do not use what's the formal Azure SQL Server. We use a regular SQL Server on side of a virtual machine. So you would still access it in this particular method. Once you select the SQL Server, you're going to put in the server name and the company ID that you want to access that with. And the company ID in particularly, let me go in and pull up GP here. You would go in to administration, setup, and company, and then right here is your company ID. This is it right here. So I could see this particular company ID is 218. So I'm going to just minimize that. And you can, if you want, you could go to advanced options. I'm going to use this method in one of my examples, and I can get to just paste in a SQL view that doesn't exist. I could just put in the T-SQL script right in the bottom. I do need to have access to SQL for those tables. and whatever tables are views that script happens to access, and then you would go ahead and click on OK. Now, when you get to the navigator pane, you're going to notice that you have access to both views that are in green. You notice the icon looks like two little tables next to each other. And then you could also get access to the direct SQL tables themselves. And you notice that they look like a single table there. So actually these look like more like two little windows, and this one looks like a table. So you have access to both the tables and the views, and you could use the navigator lookup list to help you cheat and find a little bit. We'll be using that in just a moment. Once you find the one you're interested in, you could just click on it, not in the box necessarily, but on the name, and you can see a preview of the data. And this will help ensure that you're getting to the data that you want to get to. So let's do a demonstration of getting to the data locally. So just like we did before, I'm going to click on the icon, Get Data, and I'm going to go to Database, and I'm going to choose SQL Server and Connect. Now, when I do this, it says, hey, what is your server name? And I'm going to choose BusyBee. That's the name of my server. And what is the name of your database? Now, you will notice the database name is indeed optional. And what makes it optional is if you don't put that in, it's going to prompt you for, hey, as part of the navigator, which database are you interested in? I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. And the navigator will pull up with all of my SQL views and tables, and even stored procedures. I didn't show you those before, but stored procedures are available. They have the little FX for function there. And I'm interested in finding the vendor tab. I want to get the same vendor view that I pulled down with my API. So I'm going to start typing in the word vendor. And as I do that, the list will shorten to just my vendors. So here's the view I'm interested in. If I highlight it, I can see the preview. That is the one I want. So I'll click on the checkbox, and I'm going to go to Edit and edit it in my query editor. Now, again, I'm going to go through the Belinda's 3 rules. I'm going to change the name. This one's 218. So now I can tell the difference over here on the left between which vendor one is which. The second thing I'm going to do is narrow down the columns that I'm interested in. I'm going to do the same thing, the same columns. I'll start typing in the vendor name, and I'm just interested in the current balance. So I started typing in balance, and there's the current balance. Then I want to make sure the data types are correct. Now in SQL, it pulled away the data types that SQL had. In JSON, it didn't necessarily know what type of data it was, so I had to define it, but here they are defined, and they are correct. And if you want, you could still go through the exercise, and sometimes I do this, of setting these. And one of the biggest reasons I do it is it also gives me a chance to verify I have all the columns that I'm interested in. So now that I've got that done, I'm going to go click on Close and Apply one more time. And now I have 2 queries over here on the right. So I'm going to just copy this view, paste it down here. And let me get rid of current balance. Let me put in vendor ID. Oops, I did a boo-boo there. I made a hierarchy and didn't mean to. Let me delete that. Okay. I'm going to put in vendor ID right there and get rid of the vendor name. And now I'll put in the current balance. And now I get my vendor ID list here. And once again, if I want, I'm going to get rid of that top 3, and I can make this top 3 as well, doing exactly the same steps, just using my newer, my other query. So now I see the top and apply. I see my top 3 vendors from my on-prem version and the top 3 vendors from my Power GP Online. So regardless of where I have the data, I have it in both places. And one of the things you're already going to notice, and I talked about having data from an external data source. Right now I have 2 separate data, so completely separate data sources, 2 complete separate installs of GP. One of them is located in the Azure cloud somewhere on the west coast of the United States. The other one is located on my desktop right here in Charleston, South Carolina. Let's go back to the slide deck for a moment. And what I'm going to do is I want to just talk about the on-premises gateway for just a moment. So again, you have to install the on-premise gateway. if you want your data to be uploaded. Now, there's another gateway that is not on-premise that you could also use. You don't have to use the on-premises gateway, but this is probably the one you would end up using. It does need to be on a machine that is always on. Once this is always on, once you upload your Power BI reports to the cloud, you could schedule reports, and you could schedule them to run on a regular basis. They will need to communicate with the gateway, which is why the gateway has to be on. Because if you schedule this to update once a day at approximately midnight every night, the gateway, you tell it what gateway you're connecting to, and that gateway needs to be on or it's not going to end up working at all. You will also notice that in the sample that I just copied today from my machine, I have a gateway for my local version called Belinda. It gets new versions on a regular basis, so you do want to check to make sure that you're on the most frequent version. The gateway will not only work with your Power BI, but if you have any Power Apps and Flow running with your data locally, the same gateway will work with that. If you want to use any kind of Azure Analysis Server or Logic apps, then you'll need to create a gateway in Azure. Okay, so let's go back to talking. I went through that fast. Connecting data in GP with itself, and then connecting data in GP that is not with itself. All right, so let's go through that demonstration. I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to go to a new screen. Now, one of the things that I want to do here, all of us know and love Victoria Uden. And Victoria and I have known each other longer than either one of us care to admit. She has done an outstanding job in creating a lot of views and sharing them with people. So I'm going to go through and get a view that she creates, some T-SQL code that gets the payables aging bucket in summary format. And I want to be able to compare that with maybe some of my vendor information. So what I'm going to do, on her view, I'm going to start where she has the word select and copy with too far. Copy to just above the word go, and I'll choose copy. Now this could be any view you create as well. The view this T-SQL code does not have to be in SQL Server, but I do need to have access to any table or view this T-SQL code calls on. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go back into Get Data, and I'm going to go to Database, SQL Server, and Connect. Now the mere fact that I am making another connection to SQL Server, as far as Power BI is concerned, it can be an entirely separate application that I'm pulling on. It doesn't necessarily know, nor does it even care that I happen to be accessing the same SQL Server. Now this time I'm going to click on Advanced, and down here I'm going to just paste in the SQL statement. Now you do notice here, let me come down here, that if you use this SQL statement option, you are required to place which SQL database is here, which makes sense. So this is one of the tables that Victoria accessed, PM00200, which I happen to know is the vendor master file. I need to have access to that table or I will not be able to run this. Another one that she uses is the CM002,000, which is the payables open. And you want to keep that in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK there. And it is connecting to my data. This time it's going to skip the navigator because I already was very specific and told it what I wanted it to do. And so it is still connecting. Not sure why that's taking so long. There we go. Oh. Let me try that one more time. Come on. Database, SQL Server, and we will call this BusyBee. Maybe I didn't have the right database before. Open that up. Go to Victoria's view. That looks good. That looks good. Copy and paste. Okay. And there we go. All right, so it skipped the navigator and it went right to a preview and said, this is a preview of what the data you're going to end up with. So I could check it out and I'm like, that looks good. And if I want, I could choose to edit and open this up inside of Query Editor. Once again, I go through my 3 steps. Notice this time it named it to query 1. This is why I like to come in and make this one of the steps. So we're going to call this 2018 AP HTB summary. Okay, a convoluted name, but we have that down there, and I could go through and choose which columns I want to include. Maybe I do not want vendor terms or credit limit, but I want to have the rest of the information. I don't need vendor name either, because I already have vendor name in another file. So I have vendor ID, vendor class, and all of this information as well. So that looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and verify my data types. They look good. So I'll click on close and apply. Now, what is different here? If I want to use my vendors query that I've already created, so I'm going to close this payables one up. I want to use my new table, my new query, and my vendors query. If I want to use those together, what I'm going to do is come over on the left and click on the relationship view. And when I do this, I can see a relationship of all of my tables all the way around. Now, this looks like it's trying to create a relationship, but that relationship does not exist. And if I double click on it, it's trying to make a connection because it sees there are two fields with roughly the same name with the same type, a data type. I do not want this to happen, so I'm going to just click on it and delete. Click on the relationship and delete it. So my relationship only exists between this new table and my vendor table. And I'm going to go ahead and just double click on it and verify that those are right. Yep, vendor ID to vendor ID. You can only create a relationship between two different queries on one field. So you might need to concatenate a couple fields together to create your own unique field if you need be. So keep that in mind. You can only create it on one field, and you do that by highlighting the field or column in each one, and that's basically it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So those have a relationship. So if I were to come in, and I'm going to add a table. So I'm going to come in and say I want to get the vendor ID and the vendor name from my vendors query. Let me make this bigger and make the font bigger so you guys can see it without me zooming. I know you'll appreciate that. All right, that looks good. And I just did that with a little bit of formatting. And now I'm going to come in and say, now also show current 3160, 6190, over 91, and the total unapplied. And so now I have two queries that I've linked together. And these happen to be GP related ones, but I could have also had them be something else as well. So I want to keep that in mind. So one of the things we know, I'm going to close these up for just a moment. I have two vendor tables that happen to come from two different GP sources. And maybe I want to look at vendor balances across multiple companies. Let me go into Query Editor again. So I'm going to click on Edit Queries. And I'm going to start with my Power GP Online version, where I used my API. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom column. So I'm going to go into Add and choose Custom Column. Now, the custom column uses the M language. M stands for mashup. And I typically do not like to write a M language with the exception, two exceptions, simple math, like, debit minus credits, if debit's one field and credit's another, or for text. And this is the perfect example for text. So I'm going to create a column called company, and the formula will be in double quotes. I'm going to call this Power GP Online in double quotes. I have no syntax errors, so I'll click OK. Now I have this column. Let me set it to text that says every one of these is Power GP Online. I'm going to come into vendors, and notice that I made sure that my columns laid out in exactly the same format. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Come in, and I just pasted the name so that the name would be the same. And this time I'm going to call this one, we'll call it Fabricam, because that's my Fabricam company. End double quotes, and then click OK. And once again, I'm going to set this to a text. Now, this is a great way if you have multiple databases and you want to create a consolidated AP trial balance or AR trial balance, or even consolidated general ledger information, this is a great way to do it. Even though I am seeing the company name, I'm creating a field for every single row, at least I will be able to identify where something came from. So now what I'm going to do is merge these two together. Now I don't want to merge into either one. I could bring Power GP Online into Fabricam or Fabricam into Power GP Online. But because of the way I named it to make it distinct, I want to create a whole new query. So what I'm going to do is on the Home tab in the top right-hand corner, there is an append query option. If I click on the arrow instead of just the word append queries, I have an option to append queries as a new query. And then I get this little window. And in the window, I could decide which is my primary table and which is my table I want to append to it. So I'm going to grab both. I want to make sure I grab each one uniquely. So I have my Fabricam and I have my Power GP Online, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now I have this new table called append, and I'm going to call this one all vendors. And you'll notice that if I click on this filter here, I can see I'm getting data from both of my companies. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and I'm going to choose to close and apply. So now that I've got that done, now I have actually doubled the size of my database from just those queries because I have each individual query or the combined query. And maybe I don't want to see like the Power GP Online one because maybe I only will look at that if I'm looking at all vendors. I could click on this ellipsis right here and I could choose to let's see, I want to hide that one so now users wouldn't use that one. So that's one way you could do that. What I'm going to do is add a donut chart to this table. And for my all vendors, I'm going to come in and I'm going to tell it that I want, let's see, I want the company in the details and I want the current balance in the values. So now I have this donut that shows me my AP per company. And if I were to come in and I were to make a, let's just add a table here, do the same thing again. So I have company ID and current balance. And let me drag this one over so I can make it bigger. Or maybe I'll just make it bigger right there. We'll come in and I'm gonna make this text good bit bigger as well. So now I could see the balance of each of my companies. And if I were to select on Power GP Online, the interaction will work just the same in between. So it's a really cool way. You can do more detail than that, but it's a great way to do consolidated information if you have multiple GP companies. So that's pretty darn powerful. I'm going to go back into my data view option over here. You're going to notice that I can see the Power GP Online for vendor over on the right, but it's all dimmed out, which indicates that it's hidden inside of the report view. And I'm going to do the same thing here for this to vendor. So I'm going to go ahead and just hide this one in the report view. Let's see, right mouse click and hide in report view. All right, so now that one's hidden as well. So when I go back over here, I only see all vendors or I see my age trial balance for the to company. So now let me bring in data from still yet another data source. So this time I'm going to come in and choose get data. Let me come in, before I do that, open this up. I have this Excel data here. These are purchase orders. Now I happen just to extract it from Smart List, but let's pretend that maybe I have a different purchase order system altogether. And so these are my open purchase orders. And I want to be able to look at information. Maybe I want to get an encumbered balance, meaning I want to see how much I owe a vendor, and I want to see how much I have on PO, and I want to look at the combination of the two together. So this is something that perhaps I want to do. So I'm going to come in and right here, we're going to bring this data in. And before I do anything else, I want to just format this as a table, just so you can get a feel for what's going on. And Good, I've got my whole thing and I've got the table highlighted. Now, before I do anything else with this, I want to point out that the name of the spreadsheet at the bottom is purchase orders, open purchase order. The table name is called table 1. I want to point those two things out before I do anything else. Okay. And I only have vendor ID in here, so that's the way I'm going to do a link on it. I want to point those things out. All right, so let me go ahead and just save this table, and I'm going to close it out. All right, so now I want to just get data from that Excel table that I just connected to. So I'm going to choose Connect. There's that file, Open Purchase Orders. And you're going to notice that I could see each individual tab. This is the tab. I pointed out the name Purchase Orders, Open Purchase Orders. And if I click on that, I could see everything in that tab. But I also have a table. Now, the table is table 1, just like we saw, and it's all the same information. And so it is better if you could pull data from a table. I would get in the habit of working with tables, but you can also get it from just the spreadsheet proper in Power BI. If you're using some of the other Power Platform products like Power Apps or Flow, you're going to need to get it from a table. So good to go ahead and just get used to the table. So I'm going to extract that from the table, and I'm going to go ahead and just do an edit. I always like to go into Query Editor and run by my Belinda's 3 rules. Notice that came over as table 1, so I want to just call this, let's just say this is Brandon's PO system. So we're going to just call it Brandon's PO. That's the formal name of the product we use, Brandon's PO. And maybe I don't need all of this information. Maybe I do need it all. I don't know. I don't necessarily need vendor name, so let me come in. And the reason why I choose to exclude vendor name from here is because sometimes, well, I'll show you in just a moment. We'll go ahead and make that change. I want everything, but let me get rid of vendor name. Let me, well, those all look good, but I am going to come in and change the name of this from remaining subtotal to remaining PO balance. So that's my remaining PO. Okay, that's good. Let me go back to that summary egg straw balance that we had here. And let's see. Oh, actually not that one. Oh, you know what? While I'm here, let me go ahead and connect to make a new data connection source. And let me go ahead and connect directly to my GP for payables transaction data. So I'm going to go ahead and do a connection on that. Don't know that we have time for me to show you some of those cool Power Summit things. Yep, someone asked the question about whether or not this will be recorded, and yep, and Brandon just answered that as I saw that. So yep, you could go back and do this remotely or yourself if you want to. All right, so I'm going to put in server busy bee, and the database is 2. Click OK here. And let me get payables transaction. So I'm going to just type paya. There it is. That's the one I want. I'm going to go ahead and connect to that. So notice you can make your connections inside the query editor as well. If you use the views out of the box with Microsoft, they have a lot of tables in it. Like this one has 301. So if you wanted to really narrow down by choosing this particular method, if I went in and said I want, these are all important columns, and I also want voids, whether or not it's voided, and I want status. So I'm going to get the document status. Okay, great. And then I go through and say, you know what? I don't want anything that's voided. So I'm going to say no, null or unposted things. So I'm going to leave those in there. And now I can get rid of the void column because I no longer need that. And the document status, you know what? I don't want unposted transactions. And maybe for the posted name, we'll leave that there, but maybe I want to rename that from posted to open, because open, that's how we think of the terminology in GP. So I'm going to come under transform and replace the value. Whenever I see the word posted, I want it to use the word open because that's the terminology inside of GP. So now I can see both open and OK. And now I realize, oh, shoot, I got the unpaid balance, I meant to get the balance or the total document amount. So I meant to keep both. So if I come back into remove columns, I can click on this gear, and then I could come back and find that document amount. I should have used the word document first. And there's the document amount right there. And now I could come back to the bottom of my list and I have the document amount. So that's why I use that particular window all the time, as opposed to right mouse clicking, like I could do this with the vendor name, right mouse clicking and removing. Because if you do it that way, you don't get the gear, but it's easy to go back and add a column in. All right, so we've got our PO. So let's click back on home and close and apply. So now I want to combine those two together. So when I do this, what I'm going to do is come into my relationship table, and I need to establish a relationship. And right now it's trying to establish a relationship to my Power GP Online one. So again, I want to delete that one. But in this particular view, I want to verify that the relationship is proper. Yep, vendor ID to vendor ID, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. All right, this is great. Now I have that set up. Let me come in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a matrix here. And on the matrix, I'm going to come in looking at my Brandon's PO, and I'm going to put in the vendor ID. Try to just add a new one there. Add the vendor ID into the matrix. Okay, so that looks good. Let me come in and set this grid so you guys can see this one as well. All right. So I've got the vendor amount in here. And this is in Brandon's PO. So I could also come in and show, hey, what is on purchase order? But what if I want to see, and let me come back in and open up, unhide my vendors right here. So unhide. Okay. So what I want to do is, instead of using vendors from Brandon's list, I want to see all vendors. So I'm going to take the vendors and I'm going to put it in the rows. So now I see all vendors. I think I see all vendors. Yep. And I see Brandon's PO amount. But I also want to get the current balance. And if I drag that in there, then I could see the current balance. So I can see how much I owe, and I could see Brandon's PO amount. But I want to get the encumbered amount. I want to combine those together. Now, those are in two separate queries. Now, I know in Query Editor, I can go through and merge and append, or merge and add some of that in. But this is where we want to take advantage of using DAX, Data Analysis Expression. So I can, I'm going to, over here, I'm going to do this on the Brandon side because I want my formula to go, that I create, to come right in here. So I'm going to right mouse click on this, and I'm going to choose to add a new column. And the new column is going to be, let me come up here and put this in. We're going to call this encumbered. And the encumbered amount will be, since I'm in the Brandon's PO, I want the remaining PO amount, and then I'm going to put a plus, and I want to get the balance from a table that I have a relationship with. So I'm going to use the function called related, and now it's saying, hey, these are everything that I have a relationship with, and I could come in and find the vendor's balance, and I can grab that current balance, and I'm going to put an ending parentheses there, and I'll click on the checkbox to commit it. So once I've done this, I now have this new field in Brandon's PO called encumbered. And when I click on it, you'll notice, you can see right here on this one, it just adds the two together. And those are two from two separate areas. So that's really super cool. All right, love that. Now, as we're doing some of this, let's see, trying to keep track. There are a couple things I do want to show you before we go on. So let's go into Query Editor. There are a couple important things, because one of the things that I did want to show you about was a little bit of basics on Query Editor that you want to pay attention to. So if I were to go into this payables transaction one, for example, One of the things that we see here, the date. The date is established as a date timestamp, right? So we only want the date to be working in our functions. I could highlight this, and I could either change the type from date time up here, or I could right mouse click. I'm going to just change it to show me just the date. Now I point this out because if you get the date from, let me add a date in, from our Power GPM line. Come back in, probably break something else, but that's okay. Let me add a date in here. Actually, I'll cheat. I'll right mouse click and I'll duplicate that connection. So now when I add a date in, I won't break the work I've done before. So let me find a date. So I'm going to grab, let's see, last check date. We'll put that in. The dates that come in for any kind of JSON API, a JSON date actually has a T, and we've kind of blocked it out of view, but it puts a T between the date and the time. So if I were to come in and just change this to date, I'm going to get, don't want to insert, let me go to the bottom, and I change this to just a, didn't mean to do that. Okay, just to a day here, I'm going to get an error message on my date. And the reason for that is because it has a T in there and Power BI has a hard time interpreting it. So the way around, anytime you connect to any JSON data, the first thing that you want to do is you want to change this to date time. And then you're going to come in and change it to date. And when you do this, this is, hey, replace the data formatting that was there or add a new step. And you're going to want to add a new step. And now you have a date there. So dates are, it's critical that you pay attention to dates that way. Another thing that you might want to do inside of Query Editor, particularly if you're going to use this as a way to consolidate data, is you're going to want to understand how you can repeat all the work you did for one company for the second company. So let me go into, let's see, well, probably a good example would just be the dates here, because in this company, this is 2018, and it's got later dates in Fabricam, and then my other sample data has older dates. So what you would do is you would go up into View at the top. You know what? Sorry, I don't mean to be wishy-washy. Let me just go to Vendors, where we got this Fabricam data from. So you go up to View in Query Editor, in Advanced Editor, and you could copy everything in here. You don't have to understand how to read it. And now I can go back to Home, and I could choose to add a new data source. And I'm going to go to Other this time, and I'm going to choose Blank Query. And when I choose Blank Query, I can now go back to View in Advanced Editor, and I still have all that in my clipboard, so I'm going to paste over it. Now, in here, it references my SQL Server, which is the same, but my company ID is different. So I want to grab this one as 1. Now, I could also come to the line where I added that column and put the company name in here, and I could call this The World Online. And now that I've got that done, I can click OK. You don't have to understand how to write to the M formula. You just need to understand how to do it. Now I have this new query that I can call 1 and Vendors. And now I have Vendors for this one as well. So I can combine them together and create that consolidated AP. Now that was a field where I added this name. I could also come back in, and I've got a gear here, and I could change it from The World Online to Inc. And the reason why I did this, I want to open up the Query Editor again. So for those of you who want to explore in the Query Editor, you need to make a change. There are a couple things you need to note. So you can see here, I changed this to Inc. And that was called the added column. That was the name of that step. Notice every step references the previous step. So if you go in and try to filter out a column, you need to keep that in mind. So if I change this name from added column to added company, right? if I go back into Advanced Editor, I could see it is now called Added Company, and this references Added Company. So you want to be careful. If I change it in here, I'm going to break it, right? So you want to be careful. I tend to only use or encourage users to only use the Advanced Editor when they want to repeat all that work so they don't have to manually do it each and every time. So that's something that's good to know. All right. We only have about 5 minutes. If you guys have questions, just shoot them out there. I'm going to go back to the slides for just a moment, and then I'll come back to the demo. There is a point where sometimes when you're combining data together, and I just didn't get to it yet, that like the Excel data versus the SQL data, where it's going to prompt you for privacy levels. So there is a guide there. If I get to it, you could see where you can learn more about it. I tend to always choose organizational data structure or private, but you can keep that in mind. I wanted to show you some of that. And I do have a poll question I want to launch really fast before I go back. And this might be a little premature, but the poll question is, did you learn something new today? I'm curious if you guys learned something new. I'm hoping that 25% that good. Couple knows. Those are probably partners or really advanced people, but most people overwhelmingly said yes, and you're anxious to play around with it. Excellent. That's perfect. Before I go back into finishing this up, because I have a couple more things I want to show you, I'm going to finish out the deck and then we'll go back. If you want to learn more, there is a free user group to join, like GPUG, it's actually run by DCI Community, just the same, but it's free, called Power BI User Group, and I've done a whole series for them of on-demand training. It does have a fee associated with it, but I wanted to point that out. Also, there are handouts in the pane. One of the handouts actually shows you how you can change the data source in the SQL Server, like I just did to go to another company, so you could get that. And then also, if you go to the webinar handouts, there is, oh, I already told you that. If there's a particular topic you want to see, then I encourage you to go ahead and just put it in the chat, and Brandon will make note of it. Meanwhile, let me go back to where I had my notes, and I'm going to end the slide right in the slide deck right there. And cool. All right, so I'm going to keep going through and doing a little bit of connection on some of these things. A couple other things I want to show you under payables transactions is I'm going to come through here, and just like any other smart list object, all of the documents are going to come over as positive. So I'm going to do a little bit of a cheat here. I'm going to right mouse click on this document type, and I'm going to just duplicate this column, click on duplicate, and I'm going to do the same for, let me do it for the transaction amount. Why not? So I'm going to duplicate that one. So let's choose duplicate. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight first the type, just of the duplicates, and then I'm going to hold the control key down and choose the amount. And the reason why I duplicated these is I'm going to take and pivot these, meaning I'm going to take, if it's an invoice, I'm going to have a column for invoice, and if it's a, and then the amount will be under the appropriate column. So I've got those highlighted. So under transform, up at the top, there is an option right up here called pivot column. It will ensure that the columns I want to pivot are the amount columns, and I'm going to click OK. So now those duplicate columns do not exist, but all of my document types do. Now, I want to caution you if you do this. In this case, I only have invoices, payments, and credit memos. If I later come in and do returns, then returns aren't going to be factored in and it might break it. So you want to make sure you have one of every document type before you do this. Easy way around this is do one of each document type, and then you could void them, and then you could just remove the voids at the end, And then that way you could take advantage of using the void option here. Now, if you do this, you could see if it's an invoice, it populates the invoice amount, but it puts null in the other two columns. So I'm going to highlight all three of these columns. I just highlighted the first one and then control on the last one. And I'm going to come up under transform again and replace this value. These are all numerical values. So if the word null is there, I'm going to populate it with a 0. So now that is something that I could start using in formulas and functions if I want to. And so now I'm going to come in and add another column. And this column that before I do that, I want to make the payment amounts and the credit memo amounts negatives. So I'm going to highlight the payment amount, and under transform, I'm going to choose this option. It's a numerical column. So the number column area opens up. I'm going to click on the drop-down list, and I'm going to multiply this times -1, and then go ahead and click OK. And I don't have a lot more to show, but if you guys need to drop off, this will be available on the Njevity site. So you can go back and catch up at the very end. All right, now under the credit memo column, I'm going to highlight this one, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to multiply it times -1. And now if I were to filter on each of these, you could see they are indeed negative amounts. And so now I could come in and add a column that takes the invoice minus payments minus credit memos. And this is where I say I don't mind doing an M column for the other ones as well, right? The other column. So I'm going to come in, or let me state that whole thing again, because what I said didn't make sense. I only like creating custom columns for text or numerical values, and if I can get away with it. Sometimes you can't get away with it, but sometimes you can. All right, so in this particular case, I'm going to call this one, we'll just call it amount due. And I'm going to come in and find those new columns. So there's the invoice column, and I'm going to do a minus, and then I'll do the payment column, and then a minus credit memo. Now you're going to notice there's a lot of white space at the end, and that's something we're going to talk about next. But I've got that cleaned up, so now I have this new column that has my amount due. I'm going to change this type to decimal, and then I'm going to highlight all three of these columns and remove them. All right, so now I have a correct document amount. I no longer need this current one because it's basically the same thing, so I'll remove this column as well. Now I pointed out that these document types had spaces at the end. Anytime you're going to link columns together, you really should do something called trim first. And that just means remove the possibility of blank spaces at the end or the beginning so that they'll connect up together. And it's really simple to do. It's kind of hard to see, but if I zoom in, you can kind of see there is the cursor on this field when I selected it. It leaves a lot of white space. The cursor is actually right where the mouse is pointing. And so I want to get rid of that fluff. And to do that, it's very simple. I can just, I could do this under transform and format, or I could right mouse click, which I usually do, and transform and trim. And that trim option gets rid of all the blank spaces. So now if I were to come back in and put my, you can't see it, but my cursor is right after the T. So now I've gotten rid of all that extra fluff space. So that's important to know. All righty, got that. Okay, so we've already removed our voids, and we did all those already. All right, got that done. I did a lot of this already. I just kind of did it from a bit of a crazy way, and looking through my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. All right. A couple things that you might also want to do. You could like combine fields together and separate fields together. We don't have time to do a lot of those. I'm not going to get into a lot of that now, but one of the things I do like to do is I do like to create a field where I'm looking at vendor ID and vendor name together so I could use them together, or sometimes I might create a hierarchy inside of GP, but I do like to occasionally just merge them together. If you do that, make sure, let me go into that duplicate one I created called, let's see, what did I call that? Here we go. If you do that, I'm going to highlight both of these. So you start with the one that will appear first and the last one. And then you can come up and merge the columns. I'm just going to put a dash in between it. So I'll do custom space dash space. And then I'm just going to call this vendor. And the reason, again, I do this, you definitely want to make sure you trim first, is then that way I can use one field and see both of the data that I'm looking at. Okay. All right, I've got my date table, got all that done. That looks good, blah, blah, blah. Let me go in and go close and apply. All right. Now, here's where it gets that privacy level, because now it's saying, hey, I've got, I added in a new query within Power GP Online, and I did it by doing a blank query and writing the code. So how do I want the security for this to be? So this is actually import. All GP will be import. None of the GP will work with direct query. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So, oh, that was an additional field, not the join field. Sorry. Trying to rush and get through it, and I should just not do that. All right. So now that I have this done, I'm going to go in and check the relationship for that new table I added, which was called payables transaction. There it is. And I just want to connect it maybe to this payables transaction. So I'm going to do vendor ID. Whoop. Let me find vendor ID. Did I not get vendor ID? Oh, I took out vendor ID. Let me go back and add it back in. Shame on me. So let's go back. No wonder it didn't create a connection automatically or a query automatically. Let's go back to payables transaction, find where I got rid of vendor ID. So remove columns. I'll go one before that. Nope. Let's see. This is why you should name your column. Remove columns. Go one before that. That was where I voided it. So let me get my vendor ID back. Delete that step. Go to the bottom. Boom. Vendor ID back. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at what we have going on here. The dotted lines you see on the relationships are inactive relationships. And the reason why you might see a relationship to a, let me just move this over so I can see better what I'm connected to. The reason why you would want to potentially set up an inactive relationship is you could use DAX coding to create or to call an inactive relationship. So that's why you would potentially have an inactive relationship. So that way, if something is seemingly unrelated, then you can, or there's a potential of a relationship, you could always create a relationship using DAX, call on one of those inactive ones. So that's why you would set up an inactive relationship. All right, let me close up the Brandon one. So I've got my vendors open, and I want to open up my payables transactions. Okay, so in this one, what I may want to do, I'm going to come in and grab the vendor ID, vendor name, and then come over here and then grab my document number, the document date, and the amount due. And obviously I connected to the wrong one because I have some document or a relationship that doesn't work. So I'm not sure what I did there. So I'm not going to worry about that, but got all that set up. All right, cool. And actually, let me just fix this by coming in and saying, there we go. All right, so we'll pretend that I had it all connected right. Now that I've got that done, you can see dates break down into hierarchy. I want to see the regular date. So I'm over here in the values. I'm just going to choose document date so I can see the full document date. Now, the document display date is actually set up under the modeling tab. When we set up the date in Query Editor, it was only how the data would react. Under the modeling tab, I'm going to come in and choose the document date, highlight it. This is where we set up how we want it to display. So I'm going to just change the display date there. Now, perhaps when I'm looking at this, I want to see, instead of, I'm going to take out the document number and the document amount, and now I see a summary of what is owed. And if I want to see how this is using like dates, and maybe I want to look at quarter over quarter, I'm going to need to take advantage of some DAX. And to do that, you're going to need to have a table that has every potential date of the calendar year available. And I promise I'm about to wrap up. I appreciate you guys hanging on, especially those of you who are in Mountain Time, where this might be infringing on your lunch hour. Okay, so what I'm going to do under the modeling tab is I'm going to create a brand new table. And I'm going to just cheat a little bit here and paste the table in. And so you could create a table using dates, and I could give you guys the code to this, where I'm just, right now I'm just manually creating a range, everything from 2010 to 2030. I'm saying get the year, extract the month. Actually, let me change this to month number, and extract the day of the month, extract the month name, the weekday, and quarter, so I can make Q1 and so forth. And I'm going to go ahead and just commit that by clicking on the little checkbox there. So now I have this date calendar. And if I were to go into the data mode and open up my date query, there's a couple things I want to do. The first thing I want to do is mark this as a date table. And by marking this as a date table, I could tell it to look at the date column. I'm pointing as if you could see me pointing, so that I know that this date column includes every single potential calendar day of the year. And that way I could start creating formulas like year to date, month to date, same month last year, quarter over quarter, and so forth. I'm also going to come in and highlight the month number, because when I use this field, I want it to sort chronologically and not alphabetically. So I'm going to highlight it, and also under the modeling tab, under the modeling tab, oh, I'm not in data. Yeah, I am in data mode. Where's my sort? Oh, right there. Let me collapse this up. Sort by column. I'm going to choose from the drop-down list. I'm going to say sort by the month number, this column. So it'll sort in numerical order by the month number, which will make the month name appear chronologically. Now I no longer need the month number, so I'm going to right mouse click on this, and I'm going to tell it to hide it in report view, because I no longer need to see it, and you can see it's dimmed out a little bit. So let's go back to our report mode over here. Now if I take and this particular field here and I turn it into a matrix, I'm going to put the vendor name down here. Actually, let me just get the vendor ID. And meant to keep that in rows. And I'm going to take the year and put the year in columns. Gotta fix this. Oh, I didn't create a relationship yet. So I need to create a relationship between my payables transaction table. Let me just create a new one. I'm going to say payables transaction and the date table. So the document date will equal the date right there. Okay. So now I can put in a year. So now I could see a year, for each year what was the total that's due. You might want to use due date in there, or look at billable. This is a weird example that I'm showing you the balance due and what year it was the transaction was recorded. But you could do some kind of cool things like this. Now, the last thing that I do want to show you on here is how you could take another reason why you'd want to use this date field option. So what I'm going to do on the home tab, there's something called quick measures. And you could manually do this with DAX if you want to. But I'm going to come in, and there's quite a few time intelligence ones. So I can get like a running total or some mathematical operations, but there's some nice time intelligence ones. So I'm going to grab quarter over quarter change. Actually, let me do year over year change. And so in this particular example, what I'll do is I tell it what my base value is. This is going to be the document amount, or the amount due. I'm just going to grab document amount. This will make a lot more sense. And then in the date, I'm going to come in. Oh, I got to find where it created that measure for me. Usually it puts the measure in the very first query it sees, or first one that's open. So I got to find it. Where the heck? Oh, I haven't put it in yet. Oh, let me grab the date. Sorry. And the date field, I'll put that date field with the unique dates right there. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And so now it created this DAX formula for me. So I don't need to manually create it. It already created it for me. It did put it in the all vendor table, but that's okay. I can deal with that. So now on this particular visual, actually, let me copy and paste this visual. So on this one, I'm going to leave the vendor ID in the rows. I'm going to take the year out. Oh, you know what? I should have left the year in. I'm going to take the amount out, and instead I'm going to put in that new document amount year over year % change. Now it's just doing it based on the years that appear. So I would want to, you know, do so. Normally you wouldn't have a big gap in here like this, but now I'm looking at it year over year % change. So there's some really cool things that you can do as far as DAX goes. So that's how DAX goes. That is an awful lot of information thrown at you in a super fast format. So again, I will say if there is a particular topic that you're interested in, something you want a little more deep dive on, please by all means put it in, and I will stick around for a minute or so to answer any questions if you guys have any. Other than that, I really appreciate you hanging on with me an additional 20 minutes. I appreciate your time and your attendance. So thank you very much. And if you have a question, go ahead and populate it in. And I'm guessing everybody's either frantically typing or slowly logging off. All right. Okay, don't see any questions, so I'm going to call it a wrap. I'm assuming I've stunned you guys into silence. And beyond that, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to get the handouts. If we end the recording before you get them, just reach out to Brandon, bcook at Njevity or sales at Njevity, either one, and we'll be glad to make sure you have those. So thank you very much. Everyone, have a great day.